Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the oldest and most powerful books ever written about success and money. The Way to Wealth by Benjamin Franklin. This book isn't just about earning money. It's about earning wisdom. Franklin shares the timeless principles that helped him rise from nothing to becoming one of the greatest thinkers and self-made men in history. Now, this book is quite big and filled with deep life lessons, so I'm not going to rush it. Instead, I'll be sharing it part by part, breaking down every important idea in simple and practical language, so you can easily apply it in your own life. So make sure you watch till the end, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because this series might just change the way you think about money, time, and success forever. Moneybag Sparkles, Part 1. On the preliminary objects necessary for the establishment and improvement of education. Chapter 1. On the importance of establishing the science of education. On a solid foundation, education is at present obviously in a transition state. The public mind has of late become alive to the importance of the subject, and all persons are beginning to feel awake to the truth that something is yet wanting to ensure efficiency and permanence to the labors of the teacher. The public will not be satisfied till some decided change has taken place, and many are endeavoring to grope their way to something better. It is with an earnest desire to help forward this great movement that the writer of the following pages has been induced to publish the result of much study and upwards of 30 years' experience, in the hope that it may afford at least some assistance in directing the inquiries of those who are prosecuting the same object. On entering upon this investigation, it will be of use to keep in mind that all the sciences have, at particular periods of their history, been in the same uncertain and unsettled position as that which education at present occupies, and that each of them has in its turn had to pass through an ordeal similar to that which education is about to undergo. They, page 14, have triumphantly succeeded, and their subsequent rapid advancement is the best proof that they are now placed on a solid and permanent foundation. It is of importance, therefore, in attempting to forward the science of education, that we should profit by the experience of those who have gone before us. They succeeded by a strict observation of facts, and a stern rejection of every species of mere supposition and opinion, by an uncompromising hostility to prejudice and selfishness, and a fearless admission of truth wherever it was discovered. Such must be the conduct of the educationist, if he expects to succeed in an equal degree. The history of astronomy as taught by astrologers, and of chemistry in the hands of the alchemist, should teach both the lovers and the fearers of change an important lesson. These pretended sciences, being mere conjectures, were of use to nobody, and yet the boldness with which they were promulgated, and the confidence with which they were received, had the effect of suppressing inquiry, and shutting out the truth for several generations. Similar may be the effects of errors in education, and similar the danger of too easily admitting them. The adoption of plausible theories or of erroneous principles must lead into innumerable difficulties, and should they be hastily patronized and authoritatively promulgated, the improvement of this first and most important of the sciences may be retarded for a century to come. The other sciences, during the last half-century, have advanced with amazing rapidity. This has been the result of a strict adherence to well-established facts and their legitimate inferences, a docile subjection of the mind to the results of experiment, and a candid confession and abandonment of fallacies have characterized every benefactor of the sciences. And the science of education must be advanced by an adherence to the same principles. The educationist must be willing to abandon error, as well as to receive, page 15, truth, and must resolutely shake off all conjecture and opinions not founded on fair and appropriate experiment. This course may appear tedious, but it is the shortest and the best. By this mode of induction, all the facts which he is able to glean will assuredly be found to harmonize with nature, with reason, and with Scripture. And with these for his supporters, the reformer in education has nothing to fear. His progress may be slow, but it will be sure, for every principle which he thus discovers will enable him, not only to outrun his neighbors, but to confer a permanent and valuable boon upon posterity. That any rational and accountable being should ever have been found to oppose the progress of truth is truly humiliating. Yet every page of history, which records the development of new principles, exhibits also the outbreakings of prejudice and selfishness. The deductions of Galileo, of Newton, of Harvey, and innumerable others have been opposed and denounced, each in its turn, while their promoters have been vilified as empirics or innovators. Nor has this been done by those only whose self-love or worldly interests prompted them to exclude the truth, but by good and honorable men, whose prejudices were strong, and whose zeal was not guided by discretion. Such persons have frequently been found to shut their eyes against the plainest truths, to wrestle with their own convictions, and positively refuse even to listen to evidence. The same thing may happen with regard to education, and this is no pleasing prospect to the lover of peace, who sets himself forward as a reformer in this noble work. Change is inevitable. Teaching is an art, and it must, like all the other arts, depend for its improvement upon the investigations of science. Now, everyone knows that although the cultivation of chemistry and other branches of natural science has, of late years, given an extraordinary stimulus to the arts, yet the science of education, from which the art of teaching can alone, page 16, derive its power, is one, beyond the threshold of which modern philosophy has scarcely entered. Changes, therefore, both in the theory and practice of teaching may be anticipated. And that these changes will be inconvenient and annoying to many, there can be no doubt. That individuals, in these circumstances, should be inclined to deprecate and oppose these innovations and improvements is nothing more than might be expected. But that the improvements themselves should on that account be either postponed or abandoned would be highly injurious. An enlightened system of education is peculiarly the property of the public, on which both personal, family, and national happiness in a great measure depends. These interests, therefore, must not be sacrificed to the wishes or the convenience of private individuals. The prosperity and happiness of mankind are at stake, and the welfare of succeeding generations will, in no small degree, be influenced by the establishment of sound principles in education at the present time. Nothing, therefore, should be allowed to mystify or cripple that science, upon which the spread and the permanence of all useful knowledge mainly rest. Chapter 2. On the cultivation of education as a science. From numerous considerations, it must be evident that education claims the first rank among the sciences, and in that case the art of teaching ought to take precedence among the arts, not perhaps in respect of its difficulties, but most certainly in respect of its importance. The success of the teacher in his labors will depend almost entirely on the extent and the accuracy of the investigations of the philosopher. The science must guide the art. Experience shews that where an page 17 artist in ordinary life is not directed by science, by acknowledged principles, he can never make any steady improvement. In like manner, when the principles of education are unknown, no advancement in the art can be expected from the teacher. Every attempt at change in such circumstances must be unsatisfactory, and even when improvements are by chance accomplished, they are but partial and must be stationary. When, on the contrary, the teacher is directed by ascertained principles, he never can deviate far from the path of success, and even if he should, he has the means in his own power of ascertaining the cause of his failure and of retracing his steps. He can, therefore, at his pleasure, add to or abridge, vary or transpose his exercises with his pupils, provided only that the great principles of the science be kept steadily in view, and be neither outraged nor greatly infringed. No teacher, therefore, should profess the art without making himself familiar with the philosophical principles upon which it is founded. In the mechanical arts, this practice is now generally followed, and with the happiest effects. The men of the present generation have profited by the painful experience of thousands in former times, who, trusting to mere conjectures, tried, failed, and ruined themselves. The mechanics of our day, instead of indulging in blind theories of their own, and hazarding their money and their time upon speculation and chance, are willing to borrow light for their guidance from those who have provided it. They slowly, but surely, follow in the path opened up to them by the discoveries of science, and they are never disappointed. The unexampled success of the mechanical arts would, upon the above principles, naturally lead us to conclude that the sciences, from which they have derived all that they possess, must have been cultivated with corresponding energy. And such is the fact. Since the adoption of the inductive method of page 18 philosophizing, nearly all the sciences have been advancing rapidly and steadily, and the cause of this is to be found in adhering to the rules of induction. No science has been allowed to rest its claims upon mere theory or authority of any kind, but upon evidence derived from facts. Mere opinions and suppositions have been rigidly excluded, and that alone which was acquired by accurate investigation has been acknowledged in science as having the stamp of truth. The inductive philosophy takes nothing for granted. Every conclusion must be legitimately drawn from ascertained facts, or from principles established by experiment. And the consequence has been, not only that what has been attained is permanent, and will benefit all future generations, but the amount of that attainment in the short time that has already elapsed is actually greater than all that had been previously gained during centuries. In this general improvement, however, the science of education has till lately formed an exception. The principles of true philosophy do not appear to have been brought to bear upon it, as they have upon the other sciences, and the consequences of this neglect have been lamentable. In every branch of natural philosophy, there are great leading principles already established. But where were there any such principles established by the philosopher for the guidance of the teacher? By what, except their own experience and conjectures, were teachers directed in the training of the young? 30 or 40 years ago, what was called education in our ordinary weekday schools was little more than a mechanical round of barren exercises. The excitement of religious persecution, which had been the means of disciplining the intellectual and moral powers of Scotsmen for several previous generations, had by that time gradually subsided, and had left education to do its own work by the use of its own resources. But these were perfectly inadequate to the task. The exercises almost universally, page 19, employed in the education of the young, had neither been derived from science, nor from experience of their own inherent power, and they would, from the beginning, have been found perfectly inefficient, had they not been aided, as before noticed, by the stimulant of religious persecution. The state of education, at the time we speak of, is still fresh on the memory of living witnesses who were its victims, and some of the absurdities which were then universal are not even yet altogether extinct. Soon after the period above stated, an important change began to take place in the art of teaching, but still unaided and undirected by science. Some of the more thinking and judicious of its professors, roused by the flagrant failures of their own practice, made several noble and exemplary efforts to place it on a better footing. Had these efforts been guided by scientific research, much more good would have been done than has been accomplished, and an immense amount of misdirected labor would have been saved. But although many of the attempts at a change failed, yet some of them succeeded, and have gradually produced ameliorations and improvements in the art of teaching. Still, it must be observed that philosophy has had little or no share in the merit. Her labors in this important field have yet to be begun. Valuable exercises have no doubt been introduced, but the principles upon which the success of these exercises depends remain in a great measure concealed from the public generally. And the reason of this is that the public have been indebted for them to the art of the teacher, and not to the science of the philosopher. That this is not the position in which matters of so much public importance should continue, we think no one will deny. Education must be cultivated as a science, before teaching can ever flourish as an art. The philosopher must first ascertain and light up the way, before the teacher can, with security, page 20, walk in it. Experiment must be employed to ascertain facts, investigate causes, and trace these causes to their effects. By fair and legitimate deductions drawn from the facts thus ascertained, he will be enabled to establish certain principles, which, when acted upon by the teacher, will invariably succeed. But without this, the history of all the other arts and sciences teaches us that success is not to be expected. For although chance may sometimes lead the teacher to a happy device, there can be no steady progress. Even those beneficial exercises upon which he may have stumbled become of little practical value, because, when the principles upon which they are based are unknown, they can neither be followed up with certainty, nor be varied without danger. There will no doubt be a difficulty in the investigation of a science which is in itself so complicated, and which has hitherto been so little understood. But this is only an additional reason why it should be begun in a proper manner, and pursued with energy. The mode of procedure is the chief object of difficulty, but the experience and success of investigators in the other sciences will be of great advantage in directing us in this. In the sciences of anatomy and physiology, for example, the investigations of the philosopher are designed to direct the several operations of the physician, the surgeon, and the dentist, in the same way as the investigations of the educationist are intended to direct the operations of the teacher. Now, the mode of procedure in those sciences for such purposes is well known, and forms an excellent example for us in the present case. The duty of the anatomist or physiologist is simply to examine the operations of nature in the animal economy, and the plans which she adopts for accomplishing her objects during health, and for throwing off impediments during disease. In conducting his investigations, the inquirer begins by taking a general view of the whole subject, and then separating page 21 and defining its leading parts. Pulsation, respiration, digestion, and the various secretions and excretions of the body are defined, and their general connection with each other correctly ascertained. These form his starting points, and then, taking each in its turn, he sets himself to discover the principles or laws which regulate its working in a healthy state. What it is that promotes the circulation or stagnation of the blood, the bracing or relaxing of the nerves, the several processes in digestion, and the various functions of the skin and viscera. These are all first ascertained by observation and experience, and then, if necessary, established by experiment. These principles, having thus been established by science, are available for direction in the arts. The physician acts under their guidance, and his object is simply to regulate his treatment and advice in accordance with them. In other words, he endeavors to imitate nature, to remove the obstructions which he finds interfering with her operations, or to lend that aid which a knowledge of these principles points out as necessary. The surgeon and the dentist follow the same course, but more directly. In healing a wound, for example, the surgeon has to ascertain from science how nature in similar cases proceeds when left to herself, and all his cuttings and lancings and dressings are nothing more than attempts to imitate her in her healing operations. So well is this now understood, that every operation which does not at least recognize the principle is denounced, and justly denounced, as quackery. And the reason is that uniform experience has convinced professional men that they can only expect success when they follow with docility in the path which nature has pointed out to them. Precisely similar should be the plan of operation pursued by the educationist. He should, in the first place, take a comprehensive view of the whole subject and endeavor to map out to himself its great page 22 natural divisions. In other words, he should endeavor to ascertain what are the things which nature teaches, that he may, by means of this great outline, form a general program for the direction of the teacher. His next object ought to be to ascertain the mode and the means adopted by nature in forwarding these several departments of her educational process. The powers of mind, engrossed in each, the order in which they are brought into exercise, and the combinations which she employs in perfecting them. In ascertaining these principles which regulate the operations of nature in her educational processes, the same adherence to the rules prescribed by the inductive philosophy, which has crowned the other sciences with success, must be rigidly observed. There must be the same disregard of mere antiquity. There must be the same scrupulous sifting of evidence and strict adherence to facts. There must be a discarding of all hypotheses and a simple dependence upon ascertained truths alone. Adherence to these rules is as necessary in cultivating the science of education as it has been in the other sciences, and the neglect of any one of them may introduce an element of error which may injure the labors of a whole lifetime. We have some reason to fear that although all this will be readily admitted in theory, it will be found somewhat difficult to adopt it in practice. The reason of this will be obvious when we reflect on the deep interest which the best and most philanthropic individuals in society take in this science. The other sciences are in some measure removed from the busy pursuits of life. They are the concern of certain persons who are allowed to investigate and to experiment, to judge and to decide as they please, without the public in general caring much about the matter. But education is a science of a different kind. Its value is acknowledged by every one, and its interests are dear to every benevolent heart. The individual who undertakes to examine, and more page 23 especially to promulgate, any new principle upon which education rests, will have a harder task to perform and a severer battle to fight than the philosopher who attempts to overturn a false conclusion in chemistry or an erroneous principle in mechanics. Among the learned community, not more than 1 in 1,000, perhaps, is personally interested either in mechanics or in chemistry, and few others will enter the lists to oppose that which appears legitimate and fair. The enemies and opponents of the chemical reformer in that case may be zealous and even fierce, but they are few, and he enjoys the sympathy and the countenance of the great majority of those whose countenance is worthy of his regard. But when we calculate the number of those who take an interest in the subject of education, and those who do not, the above numbers will be reversed. 999 among the educated public will be found who take a real interest in the progress of education, for one who cares nothing about it. This is a fearful odds where there is a likelihood of opposition, and opposition may be expected. For there will be influences in many of the true friends of education, derived from old prejudices within, combined with the pressure of conflicting sentiments in their friends from without, which will render the task of establishing new and sound principles in this first of the sciences an irksome, and even a hazardous employment. Coldness or opposition from those whom we honor and love is always painful, and yet it should be endured, rather than that the best interests both of the present and future generations should be sacrificed. The opinions of all good men deserve consideration. But when they are merely opinions and are not founded on reason, they are at best but specious, and when they are opposed to truth and are contrary to experience, a zealous adherence to them becomes sinful and dangerous. Such persons ought to commend, rather than blame, the page 24 reformer in education, when he declines to adopt ancient dogmas which he finds to be useless and hurtful. And at all events, if all have agreed to disregard the authority of an Aristotle or a Newton, when opposed to new facts and additional evidence, the educationist must not allow himself to be. Chapter 3. On the improvement of teaching as an art. As education on account of its importance takes precedence in the sciences, so teaching should rank first among the arts. The reasons for this arrangement are numerous, but the consideration of two will be sufficient. The first is that all the other arts refer chiefly to time and the conveniences and comforts of this world, while the art of teaching not only includes all these, but involves also many of the interests of man through eternity. And the second is that without this art all the other arts would produce scarcely any advantage. Without education of some kind, men are and must continue to be savages, it being the only effectual instrument of civilization. It is the chief, if not the only means for improving the condition of the human family, and for restoring man to the dignity of an intelligent and virtuous being. As science is the investigation and knowledge of principles, so an art may be defined as a system of means, in accordance with these principles, for attaining some special end. Teaching is one of the arts, and it depends as entirely for its success upon a right application of the principles of the science of education, as the art of dyeing does upon the principles of chemistry. As an art, therefore, teaching must be subjected to all those laws which regulate the improvement of the other arts, and without which it can never be successfully carried on, far less perfected. These laws are now very generally understood, and we shall briefly advert to a few of them, which are page 26 necessary for our present purpose, and endeavor to point out their relation to the art of teaching. 1. One of the first rules connected with the improvement of the arts is, that the artist have a specific object in view, for the attainment of which all his successive operations are to be combined. The manufacturer has his cloth in prospect, before he has even purchased the wool of which it is to be composed. And it is the desire of procuring cloth of the most suitable quality, and by the easiest means, that compels him to draw liberally and constantly from the facts ascertained, and the principles developed by the several sciences. From the science of mechanics, he derives the various kinds of machinery used in the progressive stages of its production. And from the science of chemistry he obtains the processes of dyeing and printing and dressing. But he never troubles himself about the science of mechanics or of chemistry in the abstract. He thinks only of his cloth, and of these sciences as means to assist him in procuring it. He is careful of his machinery, and is constantly alive to the mode of its working, and is thus prompted to adopt such improvements as observation or experience may suggest. But it is not the machinery of itself that he either cares for or thinks about. No, it is still the cloth that he keeps in view, and his machinery is esteemed or slighted, adopted or abandoned, exactly in proportion as it forwards his object. The processes necessary in the different departments of his establishment are complicated and various, and to a stranger they are both curious and instructive. But it is neither the labor nor the variety that he is seeking. His is a very different object, and of this object he never loses sight, for the varied operations of stapling and carding, of spinning and weaving, are nothing more than means which he employs for accomplishing his end. He knows the uses of the whole complicated operations, and he sees at a glance and can tell in a moment, page 27, how each in its turn contributes to the great object, of all, the production of a good and marketable cloth. Now this law ought to be applied with the utmost strictness to the art of teaching. For if teaching be really an art, that is, a successive combination of means, it should undoubtedly be a combination of means to some specific end. Nothing can be more obvious than that a man who sits down to work should know what he intends to do and how he is to do it. Such a line of conduct should be imperatively demanded of the teacher, both on account of the importance of his work and of the immense value of the material upon which he is to operate. The end he has in view, whatever that end may be, ought to be correctly defined before he begins, and no exercise should upon any account be prescribed or demanded from his pupils, which does not directly, or indirectly at least, conduce to its attainment. To do otherwise is both injudicious and unjust. For if the operations of the husbandman during spring have to be selected and curtailed with the strictest attention to time and the seasons, how carefully ought the energies and the time of youth to be economized, when they have but one short springtime afforded them, during which they are to sow the seed which shall produce good or evil fruit for eternity. As to what this great end which the teacher ought steadily to contemplate should be, we shall afterwards inquire. At present we are desirous only of establishing this general law in the art of teaching, that there should be an end accurately defined, and constantly kept in view, and for the attainment of which every exercise prescribed in the school should assist. The teacher who does otherwise is traveling in the dark, and compelling labor for labor's sake. Like the manufacturer who would keep all his machinery in motion, not to make cloth, but to appear to be busy. 2. Another law adopted in the successful prosecution of the arts is to use the best known means for page 28 attaining any particular end. This law is well known in all the other arts, and success invariably depends upon its adoption. The fields are not now tilled by the hoe, nor is cotton spun by the hand. These modes of operating have no doubt the recommendation of antiquity, but here antiquity is always at a discount, and no one doubts the propriety of its being so. The arts are advancing, and they who would impede their progress on the plea of not departing from the usages of antiquity would be pitied or laughed at. The art of teaching, like the other arts, depends for its success on a strict adherence to this law, and the fear of departing in this case from the particular usages of our ancestors is equally unreasonable. Soft ground in the valleys compelled them to travel their pack-horses right over the hills, and the want of the jenny made them spin their yarn by the hand. But still, the same principle which guided them in the adoption of those methods was strictly the one which we are here recommending, that of using the best known means for accomplishing the particular end. Those who adopt the principle do most honor to their sagacity, while their shallow admirers, by abandoning the principle, and clinging to their necessarily imperfect mode of applying it, at once libel their good sense, and dishonor those whom they profess to revere. As society is rapidly advancing, paternal affection would undoubtedly have prompted them to advise their descendants to take the benefits of every advance. And it would be as reasonable for us to suppose that if they were now alive, they would advise us to travel over the hills on their old roads, or make our cloth in the old way, as to think they would be gratified by our continuing to use exercises in education, which sound philosophy and experience have shown to be fallacious and hurtful, or that they would be displeased by the use of those which extensive experiment has now proved to be natural, easy, and efficient. Page 29. These ancestral trammels have all been shaken off, wherever the acquisition of money is concerned. The mechanical processes of his forefathers have no charm for the modern manufacturer, when he can attain his object more economically by a recent improvement. Neither does he go blindfold upon a mere chance, seldom even upon a sagacious conjecture, unless there be some good grounds for its formation. In every successive stage of his operations, he is awake to the slightest appearance of defect, and he hesitates not a moment in abandoning a lesser good for a greater, whenever he perceives it. He husbands time, he husbands expense, he husbands supervision and risk. Every step with him is a step in advance. Every operation has a design, every movement has a meaning, and he makes all unite for the attainment of one common object. Can we doubt that, in like manner, the most rigid economy of time and labor ought to be adopted in the art of teaching? When the end has once been distinctly defined, it ought steadily to be kept in view, and no exercise should be prescribed which does not contribute to its attainment. There should be no bustling about nothing, no busy idleness, no fighting against time, no unnecessary labor, nor useless exhaustion of the pupil's energies. The time of youth is so precious, and there is so much to be done during it, that economy here is perhaps of more importance than in anything else. Every book or exercise, therefore, which has not a palpable tendency to forward the great object designed by education, should by the teacher be at once given up. 3. Another law which experience has established as necessary for the perfecting of any of the arts is a fair and honest application of the successive discoveries of science to its improvement. This has been the uniform practice in those arts which have of late been making such rapid progress. The artist and mechanic are never indifferent to the various page 30 improvements which are taking place around them, nor do they ever stand apart, till they are forced upon their notice by third parties, or public notoriety. There is, in the case of the manufacturer, no nervous timidity about innovation, nor does he ever attempt to deceive himself by ignorantly supposing that the change can be no improvement to, nor will he suffer himself to be deceived by others. His workmen are not allowed, to save themselves future trouble, to be careless or sinister in their trials of the improvement. For he knows that however it may be with them, yet if his neighbor succeeds and he fails, it may prove his ruin. Such also should be the conduct of the teacher. The time has now gone by when parents were ignorant, either of what was communicated at school, or the manner in which it was taught. The improvement of their children by education has become a primary object with all sensible parents, and they will never again be satisfied with a school or a teacher where solid instruction and the most useful kind of knowledge are not imparted. Ameliorations in his art, therefore, is now as necessary to the teacher as improvements in machinery are to the mechanic and the manufacturer. It will no longer do for him to say, "I can see no improvement in the change," if the parents of his pupils have been able to discover it, and the teacher who stands still in the present forward march of society will soon find himself left alone. The practical educationist, like the mechanician, ought no doubt to be cautious in adopting changes upon chance. But wherever an improvement in his art has been sufficiently proved by fair experiment or long experience, and particularly when the principle upon which its success depends has been fully ascertained, his rejecting the change on the plea of inconvenience, or from the fear of trouble, is not only an act of injustice to the parents of his pupils, but is a wrong which will very soon, page 31, begin to react upon his own interests. The effect of indifference to improvement in this, as in other arts, may not be felt for a time, but as soon as others have made themselves masters of the improvements which he has rejected, the successive departure of his pupils, and the melting away of his classes, will at last awaken him to a sense of his folly, when it may be too late. Such has usually been the effect of remissness in the other arts, and the present state of the public mind in regard to education indicates a similar result in similar circumstances. In connection with this part of our subject, it may here be necessary to remark that as the experience of all teachers may not be alike in the first working of a newly applied principle, the principle itself, when fully ascertained, is not on that account to be either belied or abandoned. There are many concurring circumstances which may make an exercise that succeeds well in the hands of one person fail in the hands of another, but to refuse credence to the principle itself, because he cannot as yet successfully apply it, is neither prudent nor wise. There are chemical experiments so exceedingly nice, and depending on so many varying circumstances, that they frequently fail in the hands of even good operators. But the chemical principles upon which they rest remain unchanged, although individual students may have not been able successfully to apply them. If their professor has but once fairly and undoubtedly succeeded in ascertaining the facts on which the principle is based, their failure for 1,000 times is no proof that the ascertained principle is really a fallacy. In like manner, any important principle in education, if once satisfactorily ascertained, is a truth in the science, and will remain a truth, whoever may believe or deny it. If it has been proved to produce certain effects in certain given circumstances, it will in all future times do the same, when the circumstances are similar. The inability, therefore, of a parent or page 32 teacher to produce equal effects by its means may be good enough proof of his want of skill, but it is no proof of the want of inherent power in the principle itself. The rings of Saturn which my neighbor's telescope has clearly brought to view are not blotted from the heavens because my pocket glass has failed to detect them. It has been by attention to these and similar rules that all the secular arts have advanced to their present state, and the art of teaching must be perfected by similar means. There ought therefore to be a distinct object in view on the part of the teacher, a specific end which he is to endeavor to arrive at in his intercourse with his pupil. For the attainment of this end, he must employ the best and the surest means that are in his power. For the same purpose, he ought honestly and fairly to apply the successive discoveries of science as they occur, and should never allow himself to abandon an exercise founded upon ascertained principles, merely because he at first finds difficulty in putting it in operation. Chapter 4. On the establishment of sound principles in education. The application of the foregoing remarks to our present purpose is a matter of great practical importance. It has indeed been owing chiefly to their having been hitherto overlooked that education has been left in the backward state in which we at present find it. But if, as we have seen, education must bend to the same rigid discipline to which the other sciences have had to submit, and if teaching can be improved only by following the laws which have determined the success of the other arts, the question, page 33, naturally arises: what is to be done now for education? Where are we to begin? How are we to proceed? In what manner are the principles of the science to be investigated, so that they shall most extensively promote the success of the art? And how is the art to be cultivated, so that it may, to the fullest extent, be benefited by the science? To these inquiries we shall, in the present chapter, direct our attention. The method of investigating the operations of nature in the several sciences is very nearly alike in all. For example, in the science of chemistry, as we have formerly noticed, the first object of the philosopher would be to take a comprehensive view of his whole subject, and endeavor to separate the substances in nature according to their great leading characteristics. He would at once distinguish mineral substances as differing from vegetables, and vegetable substances as differing from animals, thus forming three distinct classes of objects, blending with each other, no doubt, but still sufficiently distinct to form what have been called the three kingdoms of nature. The various objects, clued under each of these, he would again subdivide according to their several properties. And as he went forward, he would endeavor, by careful examination and experiment, to ascertain, not only their combinations, but also the characteristic properties of their several elements. The chemist, in this method of investigating nature, almost always proceeds upwards, analytically, advancing from the general to the special, from the aggregate to its parts, endeavoring to ascertain as he proceeds the laws which regulate their composition and decomposition, for the purpose simply of endeavoring to imitate them. By this means alone he expects to perfect the science, and to benefit the arts. In the science of botany, zoology, anatomy, physiology, and almost all the others, the same plan has, page 34, been adopted with invariable success. The subject, whatever it be, is looked upon as a whole, and then separated into its great divisions. These again are subdivided into classes, and these again into orders, genera, species, and varieties, by which means each minute part can be examined by itself in connection with the whole. The memory and the judgment are assisted in their references and application, and order reigns through the whole subject, which otherwise would have been involved in inextricable confusion. In education, as in the other sciences, nature is our only sure teacher, and the educationist, therefore, who desires success, must proceed in the investigation in a similar way. He must first take a comprehensive view of nature's educational processes, divide them into their several kinds, and subdivide these again when necessary, that each may be viewed alone. He must then ascertain the nature and the object of these processes, and observe the means and the methods employed for accomplishing them, that he may, if possible, be enabled to imitate them. In this way, and in this way alone, he is to perfect the science of education, and benefit the art of teaching. That this is the best way yet known of proceeding in investigating and improving the science of education, experience has already proved, and that it must theoretically be so, we think can admit of little doubt. The operations of nature exhibit the soundest philosophy, and the most perfect examples of art. The materials she selects are the most suitable for the purpose. The means she employs are always the most simple and efficient, and her ends are invariably gained at the least expense of material, labor, and time. In the pursuit, therefore, of any object or end similar to that in which we find nature engaged, man's truest wisdom is to distrust his own speculations, and to learn from her teaching. He should, with a childlike docility, follow her leadings and imitate her operations, both as it respects the page 35 materials he is to employ, and the mode and order in which he is to use them. Were an artist to find himself at a loss for the want of an instrument to accomplish some particular purpose, or some new material upon which to operate, or some special, but as yet unknown means for attaining some new and important object, we are warranted by facts to say that the natural philosopher would be his best instructor. For if he can be directed to some similar operation of nature, or have pointed out to him some one or more of nature's pupils, some animal or insect perhaps, whose labor or object is similar to his own, he will most probably find there, or have suggested to him by their mode of procedure, the very thing he is in search of. By studying their methods of operating, and the means employed by them for accomplishing their end, some principle or device will be exhibited, by the imitation of which his own special object will most readily and most successfully be attained. Every day's experience gives us additional proof of the importance and soundness of this suggestion, for it is a remarkable fact that there is scarcely a useful mechanical invention to which genius has laid claim, and deservedly laid claim, that has not its prototype somewhere in nature. The same principles, working perhaps in the same manner, have been silently in operation, thousands of years before the inventor was born, but which, from want of observation, or the neglect of its practical application to useful purposes, lay concealed and useless. This culpable neglect in practically applying the works and ways of God as he intended, has carried with it its own punishment, for thousands of the conveniences and arts, which at present smooth and adorn the paths of civilized life, have all along been placed within the reach of intelligent man. If he had but employed his intelligence as he ought to have done in searching them out, and had asked himself when he perceived them, "What does this teach me?" the very question would have suggested page 36 a use. This accordingly will be found to be the true way of studying nature, and one especial design for which a beneficent Creator has spread out his works for our inspection. In proof and in illustration of this fact, we may refer to the telescope, which has from the beginning had its type in the human eye, to the formation of paper, which has been manufactured for thousands of years by the wasp, to the levers, joints, and pulleys of the human body, of which the mechanist has as yet only made imperfect imitations, and to the saw of an insignificant insect, the sawfly, which has never yet been successfully imitated by man. In prosecuting our investigations into the science of education, therefore, our business is to study nature in all the educational processes in which we find her occupied, and of which we shall find there are many, to observe and collect facts, to detect principles and to discover the means employed in carrying them out, and the modes of their working, to trace effects back to their causes, and then again to follow the effects through their various ramifications, to some ultimate end. These are the things which it is the business of the educationist to investigate, and to record for the benefit of the teacher and his art. The duty of the teacher, on the other hand, is to apply to his own purposes, and to turn to use in the prosecution of his objects, those facts discovered by the philosopher in the study of nature. He should by all means understand the principles upon which nature works, and the means which she employs for attaining her ends. He ought, as far as circumstances will allow, to arrive at his object by similar means, choosing similar materials and endeavoring invariably to work upon the same model. By honestly following out such a mode of procedure, he must be successful, for although he can never attain to the perfection of nature, yet this is obviously the best, if not the only method by which he can ever approximate towards it. And that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this first part of The Way to Wealth by Benjamin Franklin. There's still so much wisdom left in this book, and I'll be covering it step by step in the next parts. If you want part 2, just let me know in the comments below, backhand index pointing down. Your feedback really motivates me to keep creating more amazing content like this. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Thanks for watching, and remember, real wealth begins with the right mindset.